Restart. What am I even saying? Non-22 equipped brass. These are very unscripted videos. I may call a washer a nut and a squirrel a screwdriver. So let's jump in. Alright guys, so right now I'm going to be talking about the overview of this rifle from front to back, talking about the externals of it, and sort of maybe the mindset I had at the time making this. So first off, looking at this rifle, I really wanted a bullpup rifle that didn't have all the weird curvy lines that bullpup rifles have. For some reason, as soon as people take a magazine from the front of the gun and put it behind the gun, it then has to look like an organic vine growing of a rifle. So I wanted one that was more, true to being a utility piece rifle. Starting from the front and moving to the back, we have iron sights on this gun, which are about $10 Chinesium. They do nothing but sit there and look nice on the gun. Also have Picatinny rails on both sides of the gun, which also just kind of look cool. Nothing other than that. I've never attached anything to it. It's literally drilled straight in. They don't even, I can't really turn that, but they don't really stay straight. They're just there for looks. Under that, we have a handguard. Nothing special about that. Right here was a Magpul hand stop. I took that off. It's actually on one of my real guns. That's where it was from originally, but never actually bought a second one to put on this. In front of that, we have a flashlight, which is out of power, runs off of two AA batteries. If you unscrew this right here, this whole part slides out. I will show that in a little bit of the disassembly of the upper in a second. Moving back, we have the charging handle, which, look at this. It's non-reciprocating, so we're doing better than the Scar already with the paper rifle because, it's 21st century. We don't need a gigantic charging handle moving back and forth with the bolt. Under that, we have a safety selector, which does absolutely nothing. With that, we have the grip. The grip is made out of layered paper that I took and I carved down into the correct shape that I wanted it to be so that it would look nice with the rifle because, if it doesn't look cool, it doesn't function well. So make it look cool and it functions well. Past that, we have the rear of the rifle where all of the mechanical, magic stuff takes place. It has a bolt with everything inside of there. We'll go over that in a second. And a magazine release, which, holds in the magazine. So, yay, we're done with the overview for the most part, but that is the external part of this rifle. Or I should say the external parts of this rifle. Like I said, nothing too fancy about it. It's just a bullpup rifle that doesn't look like an organic vine strange rifle. It's very straightforward. Everything does what it's supposed to, because back in the day I was like, hey, maybe I'll try to make this out of aluminum. So I tried to make this as true to functionality of a real gun as possible, but it was mainly made for a prop in a movie that we never did, and other spicy stuff that will never come to light. Okay, so partial disassembly, upper from lower, so we can go over the upper really quick. Inspired by the Air 15, but this only has one pin to take it down from upper to lower. Pin comes out. Take the rifle and you can move this back 1/4 of an inch and then straight down. We're going to put this lower aside for a second. So now we're going to go into the internals. So at the back of this, we have the bolt carrier group, which is all captured, spring, rails, firing pin, all that good stuff. I'm going to be going over that in just a second. We have the chamber, the barrel, and the muzzle brake. So how this gun actually cycles and operates is through that. So the round is chambered. It has no actual, I shouldn't say round, the actual shell is chambered. There's no round being fired, but it's chambered right inside of here. The powder that it runs off fires, goes down the barrel, and the front of this is actually tapered to a smaller kind of exit up port. So most of the gas builds up and actually pushes the round or the shell backwards, and that's how the system actually cycles. There's no gas tube, there's no piston or anything like that gas tube and piston. I don't know how I got 3 right there, but there's no gas tube or piston. It is all by blowback. So once that barrel has enough pressure, it starts pushing the entire bolt backwards and cycles that way. Because of that, I actually had a catastrophic malfunction when something happened. I'll get to this part, but something happened and this didn't let any gas out. The round expanded and the front of this completely blew off. The only way we can disassemble the entirety of the barrel and pull it out, we have to pull this front part off, which is held in by one screw in the front. Take that screw out, put it aside, press down the button, and then we can pull the entirety of the light that dog is barking like crazy. Pull the entirety of the light assembly out in the front, which is just a flashlight, which I have just completely disassembled and remade to fit inside. Nothing fancy about that. It's got the electronic controls and the switch right here to actually activate the light through the detent or through the rubber button right here. Now I'm going to take the barrel internal part out and kind of show you guys that. So from there, we're going to take out this screw. To take out that screw in the front, what that does is allows us to take off the muzzle brake on the front, which it is just fitted to that airsoft barrel, which is inside here through JB Weld, so it gets almost a perfect fit. And how I do that is I put a small amount of oil on the metal before I put it inside of the JB Weld, so after it's on there, I can usually just force the thing off and it is a perfect fit. There's nothing special to this muzzle brake. It is just a single port muzzle brake that I made for this. From there, we can take this Allen screw or Allen wrench and we take out the barrel nut, barrel screw. It's one of those names. There you go. Take that out. Only one is held in. And then we can pull it straight back, flip it over while it is still inside of the rear of the receiver. And that comes completely out. And now the upper is just a shell. There's no other mechanical parts to this. It is just as it looks. Okay, so we have the barrel now, 6mm airsoft barrel. We have a chamber, which is steel lined, but inside or outside of that steel lined chamber is JB Weld, so I could form it to the blank rounds that I make and fire in this, like so. The front of this, like I was shown before, is fitted on, and I don't know if you can see that small hole right there is the only exit gas that's allowed to go forward, because the rest of this, when fired, builds up that gas. A small amount for the effect of the muzzle flash is let out forward, and the rest of it forces this round backwards on this bolt, and that is how it cycles. So taking this, setting it aside, now we can go to the bolt. All right, so the more and more we get into the internals of this gun, the more and more I have to say, yeah, guys, I know it's a dumpster fire inside of this. There's pieces glued, there's just things everywhere, and the more and more I look inside of this, I'm like, how in the world did I ever pass this as a functioning rifle? How did I get this thing to work? Since then, my engineering skills have improved, but whenever I look back at these older things I make, I'm like, you made this in one way, you made it work, but my gosh, you could have done so many things different. So going into this bolt, I heavily designed it off of the ACR bolt and other types of kind of competition to the AR-15 bolts, which were all held inside of the receiver. They don't have a elongated part. Everything is just kept right in one area. But since I made this out of paper, I couldn't put the rails on the side of the paper, so I had to decide to make my own captured rails front and back, which that's why there's these weird foreign objects which you don't find on real guns, because I had to make it this way. The recoil spring is a dual recoil spring because I couldn't find one that kind of did both of the jobs of these springs. I just didn't have any, and this is what I found worked best because, like I said, I'm not firing a projectile. I'm not doing everything a normal gun does, so I can't just put in a heavy spring and move the gas system. I have to adjust the springs to the fixed amount of gas coming out of the front of that barrel. So how you take this thing apart is you grab this front part right here and lift it up, and then your springs and everything like that and your guide rod come right out. This is the dual spring I was talking about. Oh, it's actually 3 springs. It's been a long time since I took this thing apart, but 3 springs in there. I think both of these are the same spring, but I was just trying to figure out what length and power they needed to be. So we can take that apart. The side of this bolt, like I said, guys, this is gonna get super strange on the inside of this thing. It's like a dumpster fire. But if you take this screw out on the side, it's gotta go a little bit more. Okay, it is just out of the way. From what I remember, you have to take the extractor, push that aside, it pushes back under spring tension, and then this whole assembly should be able to, slide right out the back. And then you also have your dumpster fire of a firing pin holder and extractor. This part goes right inside of here. This is actually, from what I don't remember what it's called in the AR-15, or an actual bolt, but this is the part that sits against, there we go, sits against the round, and I'm gonna call it, I think it's the ejector pin, but that's the part that ejects it. This is your extractor pin, or extractor right there. It would sit like so. This is your firing pin right in the middle. This is an old screw that I put brass around the front so it only goes a certain amount forward. It is truly a dumpster fire inside of this thing. If you take this part right here and you move that out of the way, your firing pin can now come out through that notch that I put in it. It's got a spring, it's captured, and then you can put it right back forward through here like so, and it locks right in place. Like I said, dumpster fire of a part, but I got the thing to work, so I'm super happy about that. And we're both learning together, because last time I opened this thing up was in 2018, and like I said, it is 2023, so it has been quite a few years since I went through this thing, but it held together and it actually operates. How you put this thing back together is you take this and you slide it through, and then that extractor is going to bounce. Let me show you one more time. Put this through here. Your extractor is going to go through that channel, and then it is going to want to go around under spring tension of the firing pin, and then it grabs. Everything sits into place. Firing pin goes through right there. That's what actually strikes the primer. From there, take your Allen wrench and tighten this in. This is what actually holds everything in place. There you go. Everything is there. These are the channels. This is the, I'm sorry, not the channels, but on a normal gun, you'd have rails on the inside. Most of these guns have rails on the inside that bolt kind of sits in or is held in place. But like I said, this is a paper upper. I can't make paper that actually withstands friction of moving back and forth. So what I did, and this is a old, I think it's an old, what is that? It's an old magazine for like a Airsoft L96 way back in the day when they still made like spring versions for $100. This is the magazine. I shaved down the top, I shaved down the back, and I found it was just the right size, built everything inside of that. And then I put these screws in both sides, top and bottom. I took a file and filed a perfect circle through and through so that this can free float, move in that. So putting this back together, you have to compress these springs. Compress these springs quite a lot so that it can go inside of this hole right there. And then you shoot the parts out right out of your hand. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back with a vengeance. I have this held with this pliers because that was under a lot of tension. I can't really do that as easy as I thought. There you go. It is now captured in there. What I did also on the front, because I didn't want the bolt to over chamber around or crush it or anything like that, I have this screw which is drilled into this plate on the front, which actually goes and holds inside of the top of the rifle. This is how I kind of adjusted, I don't know if that'd be called head spacing or anything like that, but this screw is how I adjusted the length in which the bolt would go forward in chamber. Not really much more I can say about this. This back part fits into the lower receiver, which we'll get to in just a second, but it fits directly in there, and all of the recoil from the bolt hits right onto this block, which is where everything puts the recoil in this rifle, into that one last block. But yeah, so that's the that's the trash can dumpster fire of a bolt, but it works. So you know, I like it. It did the purpose I needed it to, being made completely out of paper and metal and random trash found around the house. But yeah, that's the bolt. Now we're going to jump on to the lower receiver, which is more of the cooler stuff, I guess. But before we do that, let's assemble this thing very quickly in a sped up manner. Here we go. All right, and there you go, fully assembled. Let's get into the lower receiver now. All right, guys, so now we're going to be going over the lower receiver. We're going to push that magazine over there. We're going to be going over that in just a second. On this lower receiver, just like the upper receiver, it's made predominantly of glue and paper and some screws and some nails. How I'm able to get paper as strong as I do is because before, and it's even thinner than this, it's a super glue, but it's all about the viscosity of it. The super glue that I was using before to make this, and even with this, it doesn't get up to that standard. It's ultra thin super glue. So what I mean by thin, the viscosity of it from a scale of like maple syrup to water, it's leaning towards water and even thinner than such. So if you put it on paper, it absorbs directly into the paper, turning it almost into a plastic, which is why a lot of these paper parts in here seem shiny. It's because they are not, that is not glue on the outside, but glue that has seeped in. For a lot of these different scoring marks you'll see in a lot of these easier to break areas, it's because I've scored the paper and then I've put the super glue on, and since it is thinner than water, it wants to absorb in, and when it dries, it turns the paper, like I said, into plastic. You can see a lot of the scoring marks I did here. I don't really know other places that I've put those scoring marks, but as you do that, it seeps into the paper much easier, so that those areas are much stronger, still flexible, but much stronger than they would be as just paper. So going over the lower receiver now that I'm past all those random little details, I'm going to remove the trigger group, which is actually captured in the back. You remove one screw. If you can get this screw out, remove that one screw, and the trigger group assembly rotates up, and you can pull it out of the way. You pull that bar and you have your captured trigger group assembly, which is actually a full power AR-15 spring. The last couple things I was doing before I discontinued, you can see more scoring right there, but the last thing I did before I stopped working on this is I was going to make a steel one, because the main failure I had back here was the fact that I'm making this out of paper. Something that you wouldn't have thought would happen if you're actually trying to fire rounds with a full power AR-15 hammer and spring, is that the paper will wear out when it starts taking those drastic and powerful hits. So I was going to make it out of metal, but I never did that, and I'm not going to, because this is an inferior type of building. The things you can do out of paper have their limits, and I've moved on to different types of building, but this type of super glue in construction is still heavily used. So we're going to put that aside real quick, and we'll jump right back into that in a second. So what I was aiming for in this rifle, because I said at the beginning, it was sort of the rifle I wanted to possibly in the future make real, is everybody makes fun of bullpup triggers for being extremely mushy and long travel, but I said, hey, I could probably do that and have it not be mushy and not be this super long travel. So what I did, and I don't exactly know if I should show how I did everything inside of this, but I decided, and I'm going to put this back in really quick, which how you actually put this thing back together. You take that hole right there, you drop that inside, and then rotating this, drop it down, it connects here and here, so you have 2 points of contact so that all the slack is out of it. I'm going to throw that back on. So this is the trigger pull you have. Remember, this is out of paper, so when you make it out of metal, it'll be a little bit more, little bit stronger and less travel. That's all you got right there. That's all you have. That's the movement of the trigger right there. And it resets, fires. Very little movement, very little play, and it fires. Now this is out of paper. This is what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't that hard to make. Let's see if I can show you all at once. Just that reset, fire. The trigger pull on that has less pull than my or less travel than my AR-15. Now, because this is out of paper and there's friction in these areas, which could easily be done away with when I actually kind of drew it out and I put down the plans, you could get rid of the trigger play inside of that bullpup trigger past what I was doing. So, moving on past the random things that I keep going on a tangent on, that's really it when it comes to this lower two. It's just that trigger group inside of here running the long trigger, I'm gonna call it a trigger bar or whatever it is, to the trigger. And then that's really all you have in the lower. It's just like a normal gun. There's nothing fancy going on. This part right here is because when you connect it to the upper, having a connection point here and a connection point here left this part to easily be bowed down. So I just added that to hold it in place. Yeah, it's a very simple design on the lower end of this thing. It's just pretty straightforward. Take 37 on talking about the magazine. And as you can see, this magazine, when inside of the lower receiver, looks like a 308 magazine, but if I take it out and inspect it, it is actually just a smaller version of an AR-15 magazine where only the brass and no projectile can be chambered, because I didn't want to accidentally put a 223 inside, or not 223, but an actual hot live round inside of here, chambered in the gun, and then, you know, the whole entire thing is going to blow up. There's no way this thing can actually fire a real round with a projectile without catastrophically blowing up and turning into confetti, literally, because the thing is paper. So what I had to do is copy an AR-15 PMag on the inside and put those two pieces of paper that are glued onto the side, also with that super thin glue, because what I was finding is, just like probably the makers of the PMag and all those mags found, when you have a flat surface on a flat surface under tension, any dirt that gets in there becomes a complete stoppage of the magazine. So you need those two rails on each side so that dirt can fall through and there's less resistance trying to chamber these rounds. So the rounds that I actually make for this gun to run off of is a unfired brass, because the way that I made the chamber, it cannot chamber fired brass from anything because it slightly expands. So I needed unfired brass with a you know, a perfect primer, and it had to be extracted right, because just, you know, by nature of this being paper, I don't have the what would that be called? The spring pressure and the weight to chamber any imperfections in the round into the chamber, so it all had to be unfired. After I take the bullet off the front, hey, Ted, after I take the bullet off the front, I will put a piece of paper on the front with the small amount of black powder, very small amount on, and I will super glue on the rim, put the piece of paper, push this down a piece of wood, turn it, cuts the edges of the paper off, and remove that, and you'd have what this gun would actually operate on. And because of such design flaw that I had in the first chamber and design flaw I have with making this entire thing, it almost led to a catastrophic explosion in my hands, but I did not know this at the time. So that is the magazine. It can only hold, I think, 10 rounds, and that's not for California legality. That's all I could fit inside of here, because the way I had to make this magazine and the size restraints and the way I wanted it to look flush with the handle, it could only hold 10 rounds. But if I went back to the drawing board, I'd probably use real magazines and probably take the front of those off and put some sort of limiter so these rounds are the only ones that can go in. But as they say, hindsight is 20/20. And I am not going back to this project, because I'm on to bigger and better things right now. Now, moving on to something else. All right, guys, so now that I've gone over front to back and top to bottom and the internals of this rifle and how it functions. I hope I still have some of you watching this probably very boring video. But I'm going to talk about the failure points I had in building this rifle, because there's a lot of things that I incorporated from the failure points and learning on this rifle that I put in other different types of projects. So when it came to the operating system, the very heart of this gun, I learned a lot in that sort of recoil system, or not recoil, but gas blowback system that this operated on, that made me steer very far from using black powder and just already fired shells, because as soon as you have a malfunction, this thing wants to blow up. Since it is a blowback and a tapered front, if something goes wrong in the firing, if one piece of paper gets jammed inside of this, if from what I had on the first one, from what I can tell, as it was chambering, it took a piece of JB Weld off the first chamber I made for this, jammed in the front, and the entirety of this system had a catastrophic failure, a seized piece of brass, the front of this blew up, everything went wrong very fast. And you can see that in this video right here. So as you can see, it blew up the front. It wasn't the most spectacular thing, but if I would have loaded these wrong, too much powder, anything like that, the barrel would have exploded or something would have went wrong, but glad it didn't. So going over the chamber, which is somewhere in front of me, and I'm looking for it. Here it is. So right here, this is the old chamber that I had inside of the gun, and all of the problem came from, you know, this terrible looking chamber, but you can see the consistency in which it was loading brass from the top of that magazine, in. But what happened with this is it was loading from one side to another because of the double stack magazine. But because I'm not loading a bullet, and these things are never intended to be chambered, these rounds are never intended to be chambered without a round on the front, or these shells are not, since these shells are not intended to be chambered without a bullet, every time it hit here, it folded that lip, and every time it chambered like a real gun, it would go in this direction, and it would basically eat the top of the chamber, because I didn't have a steel liner like I do in this one. It would eat the top of the chamber over and over and over. But what happened is, upon firing, it went up, chipped a piece off, flowed down the barrel all the way to the front where I have it crimped down to only let a little bit of gas out, clogged inside of that, fired. The round then didn't have the right proper gassing to it, expanded the round in the chamber, as you can see in this photo, expanded that chamber and expanded that round, keeping it inside of that chamber. And I eventually got them out, and this is what it looks like. You can see the two marks where it would eat and expand, or not eat, but it would eat the top of the roof of the chamber and expanded right inside, lodging these rounds inside, almost making a full-blown catastrophic failure. This is also another reason I have moved away from doing things this way, because if I'm going to go to the extent to make a gun that fires exactly like a gun, looks like a gun, has shells like a gun, I should just go and make a gun. Oh, side note, I even made a suppressor for this thing. Doesn't work. It's a mock suppressor. You just push it on the front right there, and now you're nice and quiet. You can run around with your subsonic 308s and your bullpup Special Forces super rifle. All right, guys, for the few of you who stayed to this part of the video, I know this is probably just going to be grueling to make it through, because I'm just going off on tangents and talking about a certain amount of details, a little bit too much. But when it comes down to it, I mean, this rifle was super cool, and I wish I would have made the parts that I had for the second trigger. I wish I would have finished that. I wish I would have done a lot of different things with this gun. I never painted it. It just made it to this state, and I moved on with it, because at the time we wanted to do films with no practical effects. So I was like, hey, I have the technical know-how to make these guns, but this turned into sort of like a project which had no end, and I just kept working on it for that 2-year period, and then I kind of gave up on it because the other film side of things, we just wanted to do other stuff and we moved on past it. So this just made it to the dumpster. But when it comes to this rifle, man, like I really wish that I had the time to go and make this real, because not even real, but make this a fully functioning rifle. Because if you can have something like this chambered in 308 at the size it is, it's 26 inches long, everything seems to work dimension wise, but I really wish that I could go back and have the time. But anyways, I have round inside. This is non-fired, but don't worry, I'm not going to fire it. It's just a primer. We're not going to blow ourselves up. But don't worry, it's on safe. But it's really easy to chamber. Pull this back, let it go. Now a round is in the chamber, as you can see right there. And it worked really well. Like you can see, I'm going to pull this back. Like the thing is a fully functioning paper rifle, and it kind of makes me sad that I didn't get to the point that I wanted to with this rifle. But there's bigger and better things on the way. Like if I can slightly mention the 3-barreled actually minigun that I'm going to be working on with a different type of ammunition, which won't jam and have a possibility of blowing up. But those are the things I'm working on, and the things I've worked on since then. I'm going to try to make more videos of, because I didn't make most of these things with the intention of ever making a video, so there's not a lot of information, or I don't have the projects anymore. But with this one, I mean, it goes to the extent where I had the original drawings for this dang rifle. This was supposed to be the short-barreled version of it, as you can see. The shorter barreled version of this gun. So there's a lot of different like information that I still have on this rifle and everything like that. This is unfortunately a 2-part piece of a 2-part drawing, so I don't have everything, but this is more what this one was based off of. This was supposed to be the DMR version, which I think an 18-inch barrel. But there's a lot of information, like I'm saying, that I still have on this thing, and I wish I could kind of go back and do that, but I'm sort of burnt out on this, because when I got to the point that I'm at now with this rifle, everything was working, but nothing was working perfectly. So I gave up, like I said. But anyways, thanks for making it to this part of the video, guys. This is a super cool rifle, and I hope I can bring more to you guys in the future, and I don't do like a 10-year gap in between making videos like I did with the first one I posted on this channel, the detonator. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching.